Hello and welcome to IMHO. This week I'm speaking to Kaspar Szymanski. He's one half of SearchBrothers SEO consulting services alongside Fili Wiese. Both of these are former Google Search Quality Team members, and Kaspar describes himself as an information scientist with a passion for content and brand building. So Kaspar, with your experience at Google, I think you will have plenty of inside knowledge to offer your opinion today. And let's kick things off by saying, Kaspar, how do you think search will change this year?
Shelley, allow me to say hello and thank you for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure and a privilege. And I think this is a question that is on a lot of people's minds. Essentially, do we have the SEO or the search crystal ball to peek into what's going to be developments to come? And there's a couple of things. As hard as it is, of course, to come up with strong, firm, exact predictions. Nobody can do that. But a couple of things are rather more likely to happen than not. And one thing that I definitely see happening, because it's been happening already a couple of years in the past, is that data will become much more the focus and the center of every effort. And what I mean by that is, particularly when we think about the most competitive environments. Now, Google has become much more economical with scroll budget allocation, and that's a development that has been around, again, for a couple of years, but the last 24 months, it was much more pronounced, right? Google has been cutting costs in a lot of areas. I'm sure we're going to talk about that today a little bit more. What essentially is happening is that Google wants to reduce duplication, and not just duplication within one website, but duplication across board. And one of the effects that this policy has is that Google crawls large websites to a smaller extent, or maybe doesn't recrawl quite as frequently as it used to. That has the effect that the landing pages that are being crawled and indexed may or may not reflect actually what the publisher really cares about, that these are rather the cash cows, or maybe they are not. And if they are not, that's where data comes in. Now, having server logs at hand, it is actually quite possible to optimize scroll budget allocation, to steer Googlebot and BingBot towards the area where we want them to be. So whatever is generating revenue, whatever can rank for relevant queries for products and services, is actually being also prioritized by Google and BingBot. So data, and this is just one manifestation, of course, so where it goes way further than that. Performance indicators is another huge topic. And there's, of course, user data and the way user behavior is being measured and factored in. So all of these and many more are on the forefront, and they, of course, need to be collected. So that data needs to be collected. It needs to be understood, analyzed, and subsequently translated into actionable recommendation. So data will be front and center. Next to that, of course, there are hypes. And this may not be a popular notion, but there are hypes all the time in our industry. And AI, or rather LLMs, have been a hype for quite a while. And I'll be the last person to badmouth LLMs, because I think they can be an amazing tool. And they're finally becoming relevant in the sense that they can be utilized in order to expedite processes and in order to make processes more cost effective. One very good example here, for instance, is coding and coding cycles. Coding can be expedited, therefore it can be tested sooner, therefore it can be implemented sooner. And in some areas, AI and LLMs are rather poorly applicable. Content generation being a very good example here, where the ultimate result is content that is being both detected by algorithms as much as users, as something that has been generated, and that ultimately results in a loss of quality. So that's not an area I see becoming more prominent. But AI will be utilized more and more for us to become more efficient. Hand in hand, data and AI, this is maybe in the future a very good cornerstone for a success-oriented SEO strategy in the most competitive of environments.
What impact do you think that ChatGPT and all the AI, the what impact do you think AI is going to have on Google? Do you think it's going to take market share? For example, I talked about this last time with Crystal Carter, and we said how, February 25, ChatGPT has 2.9 billion visits, which is up from last year. August last year was at 2.6 billion. Gartner's predicting a 25% drop in search engines. Do you think potentially that Google is going to lose some market share, and is this going to impact on SEO?
It's a very good question, because I think it depends really on Google, and it's not because of ChatGPT. And don't get me wrong, for 2 decades, there was never a serious contender. And we have a serious contender now, which can be very good. This can really propel Google to new heights. But at the same time, while their market share currently is still hovering around 90%, I'm talking about the global market share, they do face a situation where they're essentially suffering from a self-inflicted wound. When Google decided 18 months ago or 20 months ago, where they essentially decided more or less arbitrarily to throw overboard what has been the mantra ever since, to put the user first and to focus on the revenue generation on a quarterly basis initially, before focusing on users. The resulting loss in quality is perceptible for everybody involved. Now, users may or may not care about it when they search for products. They may be still inclined to click on advertising, but for us, it's a sore sight to see more advertising than anything else, right? So it comes down to whether Google will be able to get back to its roots. And I'm certainly, of course, hoping that they will, because they have the potential. Google is much, much more than the brand that we're familiar with. And don't get me wrong, the brand is a giant. It's not just that it is so large, it's so positive, the association is positive. But there is, of course, much other factors, such as the infrastructure and the architecture they have in place. It's not easy to be rebuilt. No organization out there can go ahead and become the second biggest server producer overnight, which is what Google actually is, being its own client exclusively, right? So there is more than just having an amazing algorithm and a really good idea that makes the global success that Google has become. But Google is indeed at crossroads, and has to internally figure out whether to redefine itself, or whether to embrace what is most important and the actual cornerstone of its success, which is user loyalty. And I certainly root and hope that they will, because it's their biggest resource. Users flocking to Google because they know they will be catered for, they will get the answers they're looking for. That is what has made Google so successful. Now, market share development, they may fluctuate, but right now, and I think this is the most important question from a marketer's perspective, are we going to see drastic changes in the quarters and years to come? And that's simply unlikely, because users are still familiar with Google most. A lot of devices are set to Google being the default search engine. So while there might be some fluctuations, I do not anticipate a dramatic market share loss that some people may be forecasting.
Quite interesting. Obviously, a lot of people seem to be at the moment thinking that AI is going to completely take over everything. Now, my opinion was, I thought we were just going to see an initial boom, an initial uptake, and then that the interest would tail off, which doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. But then also I look at Google, and I feel like over the last few years, they've really been pushing towards being a marketplace more than anything else. And I've kind of got a bit of a theory at the moment, where I'm feeling maybe because at the moment, a lot of user research has been done across, say, TikTok, and AI is predominantly being used for a lot of research more than anything else. So maybe it might be that the research part of the search journey will be done across discovery engines, but whereas Google might potentially, where it could excel, is being in a marketplace. Do you think that's possible?
It's a possible scenario, absolutely. And then a refreshing perspective, if you allow me to say so, where there is not a dominant force in the market, but rather strong search options coexist with each other, serving different intentions, because that's what we're talking about, right? Informational queries rather than commercial queries. Now, obviously, these two go hand in hand, and I do believe whoever has the opportunity as a company will try to combine those, because it's much easier for the user to switch from an informational query to the commercial query with one click, within one interface, within one service, rather than to go back and forth and navigate. And that's also what users are quite familiar with Google. And let's keep in mind, with Google One boxes, with all the attempts to provide essentially answers as swiftly as possible, Google has been addressing both ends of this spectrum for a really long time. So there's no reason why they could not be still doing that, but they will most certainly have to reevaluate whether it actually does pay off in the long term to prioritize quarterly results over long-term loyalty of their user base. I do think, however, that the market may allow also for very specialized AI solutions when these are fine-tuned to the extent where data is reliable. Because whether we talk about Google search or Bing search or AI solutions, it's essentially all input-based, and without any verification method, the output is only as good as the input. And we both know, and our listeners probably as well, is that the input has deteriorated over years, a factor we didn't talk about today yet. For a very long time, this is particularly Google's doing, and unintentionally so, because for a very long time, Google kept saying content is king. And a lot of organizations embrace that. Now, Google should have been saying quality content is king, which they did not. So SEO content was being produced en masse, whether that was relevant or not. And the web has become a place where everything looks and feels kind of like the same and isn't really distinguishable in a lot of places, where content, SEO content, filling content is dominant. And that content is, of course, feeding all AI solutions out there as much as the Google index. So as long as there are no good methods of verifying the quality of the data, the quality of the content that is being absorbed, the output won't be reliable to the extent that we can say, okay, we actually trust that information to the extent that we will make our own decisions based on that information that is out there. And data verification will become really, really important. And we're touching on a very different and much broader topic, which is the quality of the web.
Just to pick into it a little bit more, what specifically are you doing at the moment to adapt? I mean, are you seeing huge changes in SEO? So are you making any adaptations to your strategy and how you approach?
Yes and no. We're most certainly not adapting in a sense of trying to follow, the most recent hype or what I rather find not the best application of time is if organizations try to follow the latest Google update and Google release, because all of these actions are reactive. And there's only so much that can be done, right? I mean, it's basically already happening. At that point in time, you can only take cover and look what's going to happen, but you can't really take action one way or the other. So what we do actually is, rather than to try and see what everybody else is doing or what Google might be doing, is to make sure that signals, our clients' website signals, are consistent. And that translates to simple things such as technical signals. So if you happen to have, let's say for a moment, canonicals and no index tags combined, that tends to be rather very inconsistent and tends to confuse search engines. So you need to make sure that these technical signals, the content signals, the off-page backlink signals, that these point Google and Bingbot towards the right direction, towards a desirable direction. And I'm mentioning specifically Bingbot as well, because I think while their market share is relatively small, comparatively speaking, that 5% can translate in a lot of revenue. So why neglect it? Why not embracing both and focusing on Google primarily? Generally, also tends to boost visibility in Bing as well. So my advice: check your server log recording. If it's happening, phenomenal. You are really on top of the game in this regard. And if you're not, you have something that you can embrace for 2025. You won't be sorry doing that. Latest next year, it's going to pay off big time.
Well, Caspar, thank you very much for your recommendations. We're going to wrap up now. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Caspar, he's, as I say, one half of SearchBrothers SEO consulting services. And Caspar, thank you very much for offering me your humble opinion.
Shelley, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure. Thank you.